What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Rock Your Brand podcast. And today we are going to be talking Black Friday. And, well, we're going to throw in some Cyber Monday because, well, it's approaching and it's approaching pretty fast. But what I really wanted to talk about is some of the things that have been happening that are kind of giving us a heads up as far as, are they going to be good? Are they going to be a disaster? There has been other sales in other countries that have been happening, which Chris alerted me of here yesterday, actually it was. And he said that he thinks that this might be an indication that our sales might not be as good as they were last year for Black Friday. And I don't mean just us, I mean everyone. So let's just kind of dig in here, Chris. Why don't you get in on the conversation here? I'm going to give you a little handoff here because I know that you're deep into the weeds on all e-commerce stuff. But why don't you bring us up to speed here? What's your thoughts because of what you've read and what you've been paying attention to as far as Black Friday sales in general? Are they going to be as good as last year?
And so just to clarify, Scott, when you and I say Black Friday sales, we don't mean the deals on Black Friday. We're talking about this in terms of customers, right? In terms of e-commerce sellers getting those sales. And looking at what I'm seeing so far, as optimistic as I generally am, without a lot of pre-planning here, which thankfully we still have 2.5 weeks,
about 2.5,
to be able to do that, we're not going to be seeing the same level of sales as last year. And I know Etsy sellers have heard us talking about, yes, ad spend is going to come up and things are going to get better after the presidential election and all of those kinds of things. And those are all still true. But one of the things that really stuck out to me over the last few weeks is something called Singles Day. Scott, have you ever heard of Singles Day? Not all the single ladies, right? Just Singles Day.
No, I have not heard of Singles Day. And I would like to know in the comments, have you heard of Singles Day? And we're not talking about dating. We're talking about sales. I guess it's a special day, a special event. Please educate us.
Like,
Chris. What is
most holidays, Scott, Singles Day was completely invented by Alibaba, I think it was, back in like 2008 or 2009. And it started as a one-day sale like your Prime Day or your Black Friday, Cyber Monday. And like Black Friday, Cyber Monday has turned into like a 4-day shopping extravaganza. And now, Scott, you even have those early Black Friday deals. I literally, right before we got on, just got an email from Google saying, hey, if you want to buy something from the Google store, here's some early Black Friday deals, right? Essentially, their clearance stuff. But the concern that I have relates to two things that we just talked about. So in the US and most of the Western world, you have Black Friday through Cyber Monday, right? So you have that 4-day sales event. Maybe we tack on, Super Tip Tuesday or whatever it is, and early Thanksgiving deals or early Black Friday deals on that Thursday. And just like that has grown over the years, Singles Day, which is essentially the biggest sale outside of the Western world, right? It's the Chinese and Southeast Asian version of Black Friday. It happens typically on 11/11, right? Singles, 1/1, 1/1. And it's their version of that. And it's because it happens 2 to 3 weeks before Black Friday, we get to see that as a good indication of what consumer spending looks like throughout the rest of the world. And yes, we're not all in the same economic situation, yada, yada, yada. But it's usually a good indication of what we're going to see in terms of US and Western consumer spending as well. And what we've seen over the last few weeks is two very different stories about what happened with Singles Day. Up until yesterday, which is when they started to get some of the numbers back, everybody was saying, it's going to be a real bad year for this. Yesterday, the final numbers came out and they said, oh, it was great. It grew by 20%. So why are we not so optimistic about it? Well, when you dig into the numbers, it's really concerning to me in terms of what happened. Yes, overall sales ended up 20% higher than they were last year. Scott, if I were to tell you that you could get 20% more sales by doubling the amount of time that you ran promotions, would that still feel like 20% growth to you? So you had to give discounts for twice as long as you did last year to get 20% more sales. Does that
doesn't sound
promising to you?
No. I mean, it's a way to spin it, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily like, oh, you increased 20%, but you're like, yeah, but I worked twice as hard or whatever. You know what I mean? So
And so that was the first red flag to me. Last year, it kind of expanded out to like a 2-week thing. This year, Singles Day sales started on October 13th or 14th. So it's been running for a month, not 2 weeks. And it wraps up on Singles Day, just like, the Black Friday, Cyber Monday stuff wraps up typically on Cyber Monday. And so they looked at that entire time period and said, oh, for that entire month-long time period, which was Singles Day this year, it's up 20%. Now, obviously, that doesn't make sense. You have to evaluate like to like. So even if there were deals going on, we'd want to look at that 2-week period. But since we can't look at all of the individual numbers and Alibaba isn't going to tell us, TikTok isn't going to tell us, right? All of the different Chinese sources are not necessarily going to tell us that. We can take that with a grain of salt and say, okay, if it's twice as long and you only got 20% more, there was less consumer spending. But there's something that's even more concerning to me in that. And Black Friday, Cyber Monday, yes, there's some appliance purchases, but it's usually the start of the holiday shopping season in the US, right? People are not just looking for deals for themselves. They're not just looking for that great deal on a TV. They start looking for deals and they start buying Christmas presents typically in that same 4-day period. And Singles Day, in a lot of cases, has been something similar, right? We're looking at a lot of small transactions, things that you want for yourself or things that you want to give for the holidays, if that's something that you're celebrating, right? What we saw this year was the vast majority of that 20 to 26, I think was the highest percentage growth that I saw, was driven by something that was kind of interesting to me. Appliances. TVs, refrigerators, and washing machines grew by over 200%. So they're not buying individual purchase type of things. They're buying big household purchases. So Scott, before we dive into why that might be, is that something, if you have an e-commerce store, that would be concerning to you? So not only was that not a like-to-like comparison, but the vast majority of that growth was driven by the fact that people are buying more appliances and less e-commerce type purchases.
Well, and I also think if you're just looking at sheer numbers, volume, that's misleading, because then it's okay, well, sales are the same, but you sold less product, just more expensive product.
Over twice as long, right?
Yeah, and so that would be concerning to me. And I think with what you're sharing right now, it's really just for us to understand where the market actually is and what our expectations could be, but also what can we do? We'll get to that. What can we do to boost our own sales and not just sit around waiting for the platform, I guess, or waiting for the sales event? I think there's always a way to spin it that, sales are fine. The economy is fine. Everything is fine. But if you actually drill into the numbers and kind of drill into things, and I mean, Alibaba, big, right? A massive company, right? Temu, big, right? And so, I mean, and we'll talk about that stuff here in a little bit, but it's you have to look at the bigger platforms and say, okay, are they up? Are they down? What are they selling? How much are they selling? Individual customers versus, sales, because you can have one sale at $500 or you can have 20 sales that equal $500. Big difference. Big difference.
Especially when we're talking about e-commerce sellers, right? I don't think you are a large appliance brand. So we have to look at the like-to-like comparison here. The other thing that was concerning to me, Scott, is do you know the reason why that category specifically may have jumped so much? I know you don't follow a lot of Chinese news sources, so I'll just give it to you instead of putting you on
please
the spot.
Give it to me. Don't make me do any work over here, Chris.
Back in July, the Chinese government said that they were going to give 150 billion, I think it's yuan, somebody can correct me in the comments, whatever, the Chinese currency, right? The Chinese equivalent of the dollar, specifically for people replacing appliances. Now, what that worked out to is about a 15% discount off the average purchase price. So they said essentially the government is giving a rebate, right? You remember those Black Friday rebates that you used to get? It'd be you get a free TV, but you have to fill out 900 pieces of paper and get 5 copies of the receipt to be able to do it, right? That's essentially what happened. And so in addition to the fact that that is a category people are already kind of looking at, one of the biggest reasons that category grew at all has nothing to do with customer confidence and consumer confidence and people wanting to spend money. It's them looking at their refrigerator going, this thing's going to kick the bucket. I'm already getting 30% off because it's Singles Day. I might as well save that extra 15% and fill in that mail-in rebate that the Chinese government is going to give me. Now, I know, Scott, you are not an expert currency conversion person. So I ran the math for you, and it's about $21 billion.
Jeez.
Right.
Okay.
So I think we could drive some pretty substantial e-commerce growth in the US if the government was like, hey, you want 15% off some stuff on Black Friday? Here's $21 billion. That's essentially what happened. And so when we take that category out and we just look at the like to like, we see maybe a 1 to 5% increase across that entire 30-day period. So it looks like it's actually down, not up. Because if we're just comparing that 2-week period, you're not going to have that 5% increase there. When you add in those 2 extra weeks, yes, you do start to see that increase. So what does that mean to us? What does that mean to e-commerce sellers? To me, that means people are spending a lot less money. And yes, we can't say China is Germany or China is the US or China is the UK. But if we're starting to see what's happening there, we have to be prepared for that kind of stuff, right? The economy here is not that much better than what it is in China. And so if we're seeing people pulling back on those smaller purchases in the equivalent holiday, then we have to be prepared for that. And it's not all doom and gloom. There's a lot of things that e-commerce sellers can do, but we can't just sit back and expect that sales are going to be exactly the same. And I think that's the biggest lesson I want people to take away from today. It's not that we have to, monitor what the Chinese government is doing with subsidies or look at Singles Day and say, hey, that's a direct comparison, or what happened on Prime Day. But we do have to look at what consumers are saying. And looking at what happened in China, there's a few interesting things that we can do to prepare in order to not have our Black Friday, Cyber Monday be a disaster. And thankfully, like we said, Scott, we got those numbers in time to be able to shore up what we're going to be doing from a marketing perspective and really start to understand what worked and what didn't for people there so that we can take advantage of the things that did.
Yeah. I think I'd also like to know, and maybe this is something that you could do, maybe over the next, couple of weeks, and we can come back and report on it, is like, what is Amazon seeing, right? What is Temu seeing? What are the individualized bigger, the big giants of e-commerce? What are they seeing as far as sales? Are they what they were last year? Even at this point in time, it'd be nice to see, like, okay, we can look at our year to date, but what is their year to date? Or what is their this year from last year? Is it up? Is it down? Right now, pretty much everyone that we've polled, which we did a poll about a couple of weeks ago, we asked what the numbers were for I believe it was October. And I think 61 or 62% of people said that the sales were down. Okay. And actually, I've got another one. I'll pull this up because I did another survey. I think it was a week and a half ago, maybe a week ago. And I might have those numbers in. But I think that for us to understand that, yes, what are we going to do with it? Like, what are we going to do about it? Right, Chris? That's the big thing. Like, what are we going to do about it? Are we just going to sit here and go, oh, well, this kind of sucks? We can, but that's not going to really get us far. You know what I mean? Like, we have to figure out what we're going to do. Whenever we do something like this, you'll get people in the comments that'll be like, well, I'm just going to leave Etsy. Well, what are you going to do? Right? What's your plan? You're going to go over and do a Shopify store? That's great. But with Shopify, you got to have your own traffic. You got to learn that, right? Then from there, you can have good traffic. And guess what? Let's say you get an ad working really well. Then Facebook or Meta decides to, well, I don't know, maybe take your account and suspend it because you posted something that it felt was violating some type of, I don't know, rule that they have. And then all of a sudden your ad goes out. So we have to ask ourselves, like, I like understanding like where we're at so I can, not feel so bad because our sales are down. You know what I mean? Like, oh, well, I guess it's not just us. That way there, it's like, it's nothing personal necessarily, but you also know now, like, okay, what are we going to do to get people in the door? And I think that's what a restaurant would be saying if they're like, sales are down right now. What are we going to do to get people in? We got to think creatively. How can we get people in? We're going to have bingo night. Okay, cool. Let's do bingo night so we can get people in. I'm using that because the tavern down here that we live by, they do one on Thursday. Things packed. Do bingo night. I don't go there on Thursday night because I don't want to sit there and hear all the bingo calling. I just want to go there and have something to eat. But yeah, they draw a crowd. But you know what I'm saying, Chris? You got to be a little bit more creative now.
And I think the thing is, we need to use that as a bellwether, right? What happened? Growth was essentially flat, right? If we're talking
Yeah.
5 to 10% increases with a 2 week longer period, what happened? What worked? And the thing that we need to watch out for is how can we apply this to our business so that
Yeah.
we're not just waiting on that traffic. If Singles Day sales were up by 500%, I think I'd be here selling a very different tune,
Yeah.
right? I would be here going, let's do this Black Friday thing, right? As opposed to what do we need to do to pay attention? And you mentioned something, Scott, that I think is extremely important for people to understand. What happened with some of the brands? Because people in the West don't really know Alibaba unless they've done a lot of importing, right? They don't necessarily, maybe they've used AliExpress once, but they have heard of Temu, whose parent company is extremely involved in Singles Day. And actually, PDD, I think it's Pinduoduo is the name of it. Again, somebody can correct my butchering of the pronunciation of that in the chat. Someone give me the phonetics and we'll eventually get it right. But they were some of the people who led the charge of starting early because they saw that this was going to potentially be a problem, right? They looked at the data, they looked at what they were getting in from the app, and there's some of the people that actually led the charge for starting things on October 14th, as opposed to starting them at the end of October, which is what they had done last year. And so what I've seen so far, and again, no one releases the actual numbers, but you can look at some of the overall growth, is they started a really heavy social media push. They're hitting their notifications, right? If we think about something like an app, you have the notifications, but they're also hitting that email list. So they started before people were ready for it. And they're crediting that with a lot of the potential growth that they specifically saw. Now, again, when we're talking about that like 5 to 10% overall growth, that includes JD, that includes Alibaba, that includes all of the big players. But from what I've seen so far, it looks like Temu's parent company, because of some of the things that they were doing, which is something any e-commerce brands can do, they're seeing better performance than some of the other people. Now, yes, they are smaller than Alibaba, so selling more would equate to a larger percentage increase. But I think there are some lessons that we can take out of that. And thankfully, what they did is something pretty much any e-commerce seller can do. And I know we want to share that with everybody just to make sure they have their plans set so that you can get as much as you can out of Black Friday. Before we dive into some of those things that sellers can do, what are your thoughts on this overall? It sounds like we're saying a lot of doom and gloom things, but is that really where our heads are? Or is this something you think, as long as people are getting ready now, if they're not already ready, that they can head off and at least be where they were last year, even if we don't necessarily see that increase that a lot of people expect just to come because of the fact that it's Black Friday, Cyber Monday?
Yeah, no, I think the biggest thing is just being prepared, right? I think that's, and we talked about this last week. We'll talk about it probably up until we get past, this Q4, but it's all about preparation. And so for like right now, we have a little bit of time. We've got a couple of weeks, I believe it is, right? It's like, what is Thanksgiving this year is on the 28th. So I believe it's the 29th would be the day, if I have my dates correct. So we have some time. The time that we're doing this right now, if you're watching this live, then it's the 13th, right? So we've got time. But we do have to prepare for that. We have to start planning. We also want to start really kind of dialing up maybe the traffic, and how can we do that? And someone put in the comments, they said social media. Yeah, if you have social media channels, you could drive some traffic there. You could also use email. You could also you can increase your Etsy ads budget. You can do all of those things, but you have to also make sure that you have everything kind of like done on your side. Right? Everything that you have control over, which we're not going to go deep into that right now. I do have some things I want to cover here. But I would say, Chris, right now, the biggest thing is for people to just not so much dwell on what they're hearing or what they're seeing. I know we had just had someone went in here and just said in the comments, Lily Pope says the top sellers on Etsy are down 50% on last year. Yeah, I agree. Like that's fact, right? Like, I mean, from what I'm hearing, I don't know if it's exact, but it's pretty much everyone is saying, I say everyone, but people that have been selling are saying that their sales are down, whether it's 50%, 20%, 70%, that's what we're hearing consistently. All right. So what does that mean? What can we do? Well, we have to figure out what we can do and then do it and not sit around waiting and thinking and doing more research and listening to why they might be down, right? We just got to get into it and roll up our sleeves and get our hands in there. At least that's what we're doing. Okay. And I'll say it right here, right now. Our sales are not going to be what they were last year, unless we have a remarkable, the rest of the year. It's just the way it is. It could be because there's more sellers on there. I know someone put that in the comments here. There's more sellers this year. Yeah, maybe they did an algorithm update. Maybe, maybe it's the economy. Maybe it's the election that did things in. Maybe there's all these things. Could be. But we can't think about that. We got to just think about what can we do, right? What can we do? All right, cool. So Nina says facts. All right, Chris, any other thing we want to address on that before we keep the train rolling here?
No, I think we've talked enough doom and gloom. I think people understand that. So now, Scott, what can sellers do? And I think if you guys have been hanging out with us for any length of time, probably the first thing that I'm going to say, and Scott, I know this is something that's near and dear to you, which is communicating with your customers. I'm not going to say email marketing because that's the obvious answer, but if you have a way of getting in contact at all, whether it's through a push notification or a social media page, or hopefully your email marketing list, that is something we need to be doing now. And one of the things that I found in the research of what people were doing that was working, especially at the individual brand level for something like Singles Day, there were two things. One was getting started early. And we mentioned that a minute ago with PDD, which is the parent company of Temu. Or Temu, don't yell at me in the comments. I think, were they the ones, or was it Shein that changed their name because people were pronouncing it wrong? I think it was Temu that changed the way that it was pronounced officially because people were pronouncing it wrong. But either way, they started really early. They started a couple weeks in advance. Now, we're not really at a position where we can necessarily do that because we're only 2 weeks out now. But the thing that they started with was, yes, maybe some early discounts. But the real thing that individual brands started with when they saw that people like the Chinese version of Temu were coming out on October 14th early was they said, hey, we're not doing Black Friday yet. We're not doing Singles Day yet, but we are going to have some things coming up. Here's what to look out for. Here's when it's going to drop. So if we have a way of not just getting ahead of Black Friday, Cyber Monday, which is going to be extremely complicated to get directly in contact with our customers, but also letting them know in advance when it's going to happen, that's an ideal way to get started. So if we're starting early, which we should be, and we have more than enough time now to do that, we don't necessarily have to run all of our promotions this week. You don't have to keep this live stream on in the background and run over to your email provider, somebody like Everbee, right? And start typing up emails. We don't have to do that quite yet. But you should be sitting down this week and thinking about, can you run something maybe Monday to Wednesday, the week of Thanksgiving? And if you can, then it's probably a good idea towards the end of this week to start thinking about when you're going to send out those heads up emails. And I think this is something a lot of people avoid because they don't want to over email. So I want to get your thoughts on this, Scott. If we're going to run a sale, let's just say next Monday, is it okay to say, hey, this is coming? Because that's what we're seeing working other places. And I know it's something that's a weird place for a lot of people. So what are your thoughts on saying, hey, this is not an email that has a sale in it, but that email is coming. And if you're interested, keep an eye out. What are your thoughts on using that as a strategy?
Yeah, I like letting people know that something's coming. We've seen this all along, right? Like, look at Apple. Apple talks about their new iPhone that's going to be dropping on a certain date, right? It's a buildup. It's a launch. Taylor Swift getting ready to launch a new album, right? 2 months before she actually releases the darn thing and builds up all this hype. Not saying we got to go to that extreme, but letting people know something is coming before it's available is always a good idea. So I would say, yes, you want to say, hey, we're working on our final, deal before Black Friday, or maybe you're going to do it before Black Friday because you know that it's going to be super busy. And you're like, hey, listen, we're getting ready for our Black Friday sale, but we're going to actually do it early. We're going to actually do ours starting this Monday, and we're going to have it for 2 days or something like that. So keep an eye out. Me and the family are working on how we can give you the best deal. So stay tuned, and we'll let you know that. In the meantime, here's a link to the shop so you can go ahead and see what's available and see what you might want to grab when we go ahead and announce our special offer or something like that, right? So you're just kind of letting people know. Then from there, it's all about the follow-up during and after, or leading up to when it's going to be over. So that's what I would say, Chris. I think it's a great idea.
I think the hidden benefit of this, especially if you're using a platform like Etsy or Amazon, Scott, is let's say we're thinking about Black Friday, Cyber Monday. If we run this Monday to Wednesday, we take that day off for Turkey Day, right? We have the sales velocity coming in. Now, this doesn't necessarily apply if you are running your own e-commerce store, if you have Shopify. But if you're in a marketplace, having that early velocity means you're going to end up with better placement in the search results. So when you get that boost in traffic from Etsy sending those emails, from Etsy running those ads, or from Amazon starting to say, hey, here's the Black Friday deals that we have going on, you are actually better positioned in the search results because of the velocity that you've had over the last 2, 3, 4 days in advance. And nobody really sells anything on Thanksgiving. Yes, some people buy things later on in the day, but you're way ahead of the curve from a marketplace perspective. If you're running your own shop, you don't get that advantage, but you do get the advantage of actually being able to get the attention of your customers. And that's something I think is extremely important. It's fine to run a Black Friday, Cyber Monday deal, but if no one knows that you're doing it, it's kind of complicated. And getting attention of people from Black Friday, Small Business Saturday, somebody will name it Sunday, and Cyber Monday, you are competing with literally everyone else on the planet at that point. And I think that's what PDD tried to do. And that's what I saw a lot of smaller brands doing for the Singles Day stuff. They're saying, hey, we know that 11/11 is the big day, but we're going to do this on the 31st, or we're going to do this on the 28th. And that's okay. Like, we don't have to wait for these holidays. These holidays are all made up anyway, right? Like, somebody at some point said, this is the date for that thing. We can say we're doing an early Black Friday deal. Why? Because we want you to get your stuff early, right? Like, the reason doesn't really matter, and the dates don't really matter. So why not use that to our advantage? So the two biggest things I would say is, whether we're doing any of the other stuff or not, we need to be starting early. We need to be starting literally now and thinking about how we're going to get in front of our potential customers before Black Friday, Cyber Monday kicks in. The other thing is, if we have a way of communicating with our customers, and it is a little late to get this started now, although you could still build an email list between now and Black Friday. Email is going to be a great way to do that. If you have an SMS list or any other way, we need to be using that to our advantage. And if we can, and we can plan to have those promotions running in advance, then we could take advantage of that. The other thing I wanted to chat about with you, Scott, is what actually happens on Black Friday, Cyber Monday. So if we're doing our stuff early, right, we're sending those emails, we're not necessarily going to be doing that on Black Friday, Cyber Monday. From a shop perspective, is there anything we should still be doing to try to take advantage of that traffic? Do we have to run additional discounts? Like, if we're doing our thing early, our version of that early, is that something we still need to worry about to take advantage of the traffic that will come from everybody else's marketing efforts on those days? Or can we just sit back and coast?
No. I mean, I want to take advantage of that myself, so it's like, we're giving people on our list early access to that, but that doesn't mean that we can't offer it on Black Friday or Cyber Monday. So no, why would we want to do that? We want to make sure that offer. Now, we might do a little bit of a better offer for our email list, but then we're going to still do a Black Friday of some kind. And it doesn't have to be like this crazy offer. It just has to be maybe something of a discount, right? Because we also know that on Black Friday and Cyber Monday, Etsy is going to push sale items, because they want people to be getting a sale. So it's just like Amazon. Amazon wants the same darn thing. So I would say, no, we're not going to sit back. We're going to take advantage of that. And hopefully we can do a little double dipping, and we can go ahead and get our email or our social media to where that way there, we're able to bring attention to it and kind of serve our really, really loyal customers or people that are interested, that we've built an email list through. And then letting those people know ahead of time that they get access early. And then from there, we would obviously let it, still be available on, or maybe just less of a discount or something like that for Black Friday, Cyber Monday. And I know another question that we get a lot is like, well, should I turn my ads off? No, we're going to keep our ads on. Might even dial up the budget just a little bit. And the reason why too, and I know people get all freaked out about ads, is because with the ads, if you're having a problem with SEO, that can kind of help that in the meantime, because we know that Etsy's going to show our stuff if we're paying for it, right? So this way here, we're still able to get in front of those potential buyers. And yes, you might pay more per click that day, but as long as you have products that they can buy, not just the one product, but they can bundle product, or you have a bundle set up